Good day everyone. In the last session of city as an artifact, we tried to cover some of the important terms we need to understand in order to talk about the grammar or the syntax of the city. Now, some of the terms like urban morphology, urban form, street, street edge, etc., we tried and discussed, and some of the terms we will be discussing now. Now, let me also recall what all we have discussed in the entire presentation which we did earlier. What are the processes that make a city? How does a city evolve? What are the various forms of the city? How are city made? How do we represent a city? So, in this part, of course, we would be covering up the grammar of it. So, the first one which is very important to understand is urban structure. If you sort of remember something about structure, and I am not talking in terms of numericals and all, but structure is a way in which parts comes together in a meaningful way to sort of represent a whole. So, in some sense a structure represent an idea of a whole, that is very important. So, an urban structure is made out of elements and they are combined in some way in which they represent a whole. Now, there are also other ways in which one can represent an urban structure, and it depends on the kind of emphasis one wants to make in order to talk about a city, and therefore, what are the parameters or what are the layers that sort of defines what we call as urban structure. Usually, a figure ground plan is sort of drawn and then it is overlaid with several other layers in order to represent an urban structure, but sometimes people have also tried out with 3-dimensional forms in order to represent urban structure. So, let me take an example of a city. It is a city of Patna. Now, in the image that what you see here, there are 4 diagrams. Now, each of these diagrams are talking about some of the important aspect of the city itself. If you look at the first one, it talks about the drainage. So, in some way it talks about the manner in which the drainage works in the city of Patna. So, let us look at this slide to understand urban structure in a little different way. I have been talking about the manner in which one emphasizes it, one can discuss about the urban structure. So, if you look at this Saint Cruz, so if you look at it, it is organized around principles of centers and subcenters. So, if you see they are organized around. So, let us look at this slide and look at Saint Cruz, and if we understand it very clearly, and if you remember the manner I had discussed, the manner in which you emphasize something, that would determine the kind of structure that it has, and of course, it has to be a realistic understanding of what we are discussing. So, if we look at it, then you see there are various centers which are sort of there. Now, around which the development starts happening, there are certain series of networks around which the development happens. So, these are sort of ways in which the city starts growing and the way in which the urban structure can be discussed. On the right, what one has done is, one way to sort of talk about urban structure would be to discuss from the perspective of natural resources. So, you see that there are different grades which are sort of put here, which discusses water, which discusses open spaces, which discusses trees with different shades, and which discusses access routes. Now, I did talk about in the urban structure that sometimes there are 3-dimensional way to represent it, and therefore, if you see one of the drawings which A.J. Morris has done to the right, is where he has sort of emphasized the presence of institution, and that determines the manner in which we look at urban structure, or it is the structuring element of a city. Now, on the left is a different way to represent it again. So, it is zoom under 6/5 and this is how it is. So, it is represented. So, there are various ways in which you can represent it. It depends the kind of drawing that you make in order to communicate it. Now, urban tissue. Now, before I start urban tissue, let me tell you that this whole definition of urban structure, urban tissue, urban block are all contested, and I have tried to put it in a very simple way. However, if you find certain different definitions or certain different way in which each of them is looked upon, the important idea to understand in that case is what is the set of relationship that one is talking about, at what scale it is trying to talk about it. If you have a grip of that, whether you call it a block or a tissue, those kinds of contested terms may be explained when you break up into parts. So, tissue according to Professor N. J. Habrakan, a tissue level is that scale of interrelationship that is smaller than the urban structure and larger than the scale of a building. So, in some way, if we sort of look at a tissue, it has some idea of a whole. It is not a wholeness at a level of urban structure, but still it has some idea of a whole. At the same time, it has certain geometrical characteristics. So, a tissue most of the time would carry out various geometrical ideas that make up the tissue itself. So, which means the way in which the groupings of the buildings are done in order to make a block, and how various kinds of blocks come together can all sort of talk about the urban tissue. Now, what is an urban block? The urban block is essentially a typological element in the overall urban composition. It primarily refers to an entity which is defined on all sides by a network of traffic routes. So, planned or unplanned, and which remains constituted by building types that may or may not contribute towards its edge definition. But it is important to understand, in some sense it is a kind of a grouping. So, you may think about it is the first level of grouping of a building, in some way that would constitute what we would call as urban block. The other way to understand all of these is urban structure, urban tissue, urban block would be the level of acquaintance or familiarity that one has. So, at a level of building or at a level of say urban block, you will be able to know more people as compared to at a level of a tissue or at a level of say city itself. So, what I have done here is again a case of sort of part of a Pune, and if you look at this is what has been drawn as urban tissue. It has some degree of interdependence and some degree of coming together of various grains. So, if you see here, there is a different way in which it is organized as compared to say here or as compared to say somewhere around here. So, there are 1, 2, 3, at least 3 kinds of geometrical way in which sort of buildings are coming together, the streets are sort of running around it. That is what is constituting an urban tissue. And when we take one of the part of it and zoom it here, we see that there are peripheral roads around it, and there are some adjoining roads that connect it, which has certain degree of familiarity. So, we discussed about urban structure, urban tissue and urban block. We also discussed about the manner in which it is related is sort of about the degree of familiarity or certain geometrical ideas that makes it in terms of the scales of it. So, I hope by emphasizing this you are understanding the levels at which we are discussing. So, one way to understand it would also be, suppose you take a leaf, and suppose if it is a people leaf and you sort of dry it for a long period of time, you will see the veins. Now, what you do is you should take an image of it, and then you keep on zooming in and zooming out. So, what you can do is take a window of the same size, put it and reduce it, reduce it, reduce it, increase it, increase it, increase it. So, you will realize that within a window which is sort of definite, a paper size, you would be able to talk only certain aspect of it. So, maybe you will not be able to talk if at suppose you are looking at this leaf from a large distance, you will not be able to talk the details of the veins etc., or the way it is coming together, but the moment you get it very close, you will be able to discuss that, but you will not be able to discuss what you were looking when you were at a distance. And this is a very important idea which we have to take it forward. So, each of this in some way are the scales of representation, and therefore, you can only discuss certain aspect of it. Now, an exercise what you can take it is that I have given you a Google Earth image of the city of Timbuktu on the right. So, what you will have to do is you will have to trace this and then make a figure ground and try and recognize the possible urban structure, urban tissue, urban block. After that, what you can do is you can take your own city and do it. See, here it is very important to understand that however there might be two cities having same way in which the buildings are coming together, and therefore, the idea of grouping, not necessarily the experience may be same. Therefore, it is very important for you to understand that at least couple of cities should be a reference for you, so that you are able to compare the experience in terms of similarity and differences. That will give you a hold about the city, and also understanding how does the physical form contribute in the expression or the meaning of a city. Now, again I am repeating the same idea here. So, what I have done is in my earlier session I had put all these drawings together. Again I am trying to put it. I had already discussed the idea that if your window is same, the zoom in and the zoom out what you do, you would be only able to discuss certain aspect of it. So, I have sort of represented here urban structure, urban tissue, urban block, and then at a level of building. So, but you must understand here is that when we are trying to discuss urban condition, the building is always in relation to something. So, a building here, so the manner in which it has been drawn, it talks about certain geometrical idea, which means the kind of space that sort of it sort of have around it. In relation to the other buildings which are around. So, I am constantly trying to emphasize that any representation which we do in an urban context, a good way to do it is always in relation to something. And here I want to emphasize that any kind of meaning, whether it is physical or whether it is experiential, you can always talk about it only in some relationship. So, for example, light in relation to street, or for example, edge condition of the street in relation to its building, etc., etc. So, always there are at least two relationship which you have to talk in order to understand the relationship. Now, I had already talked in my earlier part understanding of sections to some extent and how do they contribute to the street and the edge. So, I will not repeat that part, but I want to constantly remind that remember this all the time. So, what is an urban system? Now, urban system, it is a coming together of various systems that make the city. Now, the system could be infrastructure, whether it is the manner in which the roads are laid out, or it is manner in which the mobile towers are laid out, or the manner in which the services are laid out, or the manner in which your electricity is supplied. So, all of this becomes part of an urban system. But urban system also includes other set of relations, say for example, the manner in which the goods which are sort of stored in warehouses which are outside the city, how do they reach to our own at a level of dwelling maybe, also constitute what we call as urban system. So, urban system is a set of relationship again, one of the most important, and various authors have talked about in various ways, is the understanding of typology and type. Now, this typology and type has been discussed by many authors, including Professor N.J. Habrakan, including the Italian school of type, the French school and the British school. All of these people have discussed in various ways. Now, this I will be able to cover in my lecture on urban theory. Right now, what I have done is I have tried to sort of put together in a way in which it is very simple, legible enough for you to understand. So, what is typology? How did it emerge, or why do we need to understand typology? And this will become more clearer when I start defining it. So, typology, it is a science of study of type. It is systemic in nature. Now, it is very important to understand that the type is systemic, and therefore, it is constantly evolving and changing, and it is not something which is fixed in time. However, it is at the same time important that within it carries certain idea of its own culture, it carries certain idea of the manner in which it is made, and it also carries in some way certain degree of formal relationship. So, now let me go and discuss little bit about type. So, type is a formal relationship of parts of a building. So, I had already discussed form, which is three-dimensional organizations of space. So, type is a formal relationship of parts of a building. It is a concept and is systemic in nature. It is always a whole. Now, you must understand there is a level at which it is trying to discuss the idea of a whole. So, type in some way is a concept, and it is represented by some drawing, that and that drawing may not be the actual representation of a building itself sometimes, but it is the rules that sort of allows it to come together or allows the space to come together in some manner, and therefore, we sometimes use three-dimensional drawing, or sometimes we use plan organization as a way to represent it. But please keep it in mind, the intention is not to show plan, but the intention is to show the kind of formal relationship that it sort of carries within itself, that allows it to combine in some way. Now, in a very simple way, Professor Anjay Habrakan has sort of talked about, at least there could be three ways to define type or sort of understand type. However, here I want to say that there could be many other ways to define it. It would be based on the manner in which you want to classify it. So, for example, you want to classify it on the basis of geometry of the space, then in an urban setup you will have different kinds of spaces. If you want to classify in the manner in which there is a geometry of the city. So, I did discuss in my earlier presentation about the shape of the city. However, in this part Habrakan says there are three very important ways in which we can discuss it. One is spatial organization, which is very important. The other is of course the physical system, which means the structure, the construction system, etc. The third could be stylistic expression. So, the manner in which say the elements of the buildings are articulated could be the other way to look at it. However, the first one, which is the spatial organization, and the second one, which is the systems of structure and constructions, are extremely important and are used many a times. So, I will sort of talk about two examples, but before talking about it, let me little bit talk about the relevance of the type or the relevance of the study of the type. So, I have put down 6 important points for you. So, the first one is to understand the core principles or rules behind the particular building tradition. So, what are the rules, what are the principles of the manner in which the buildings were made? The second is to understand the use of type in creating a large palette of building use. So, a same idea of the type can be used to create a house, it can be used to create a large institution like palace, like school buildings, etc. So, the same idea repeats at various scale to give some sense of a large palette. So, in that way there is continuity of the rules, only the scales of it is changing, and therefore, the manner in which one understands the physical form of it. The third is to be able to get hold of the shared architectural qualities and codes of a society, as well as understand individual expression. So, a type we discussed earlier, there are certain continuity and there are certain shared idea which it tries to express, and also in some way what are the individual expressions that it sort of carries forward. The fourth is to be able to compare two different or same type across region and climate as a hint towards similar typological resolution of diverse condition. So, you might realize that certain different climatic conditions where it is sort of desert, we are talking about the Thar desert in India, where there are certain ways in which we find courtyard house, or whether we are talking about tropical climate where we again find certain courtyard houses. So, there are different geographical conditions, there are different climatic conditions, yet they are coming up with the same kind of resolution. So, it also allows to compare across time, across region, and therefore, certain degree of constancy or arriving at a same resolution having different parameters to deal with is an important relevance or important learnings which we can take from the study of the type. And I must remind you here that the type is constantly evolving, it is not static, it is changing over a period of time. The fifth one is to understand type also means to be aware about the transformation of the type and hence a process of transformation. I covered up in my last part. And the sixth is to understand opportunity and constraint in adoption of a particular system of deriving that type, say example size of the timber available and its relationship to the span. Now, what I mean here is sometimes the available material also determines the type itself. So, there are certain spans only you can make it, and therefore, the scale or the size of the spaces are sort of a certain kind, which gives you certain idea of the type itself. And why is it continuing in some way? The hint is the construction system or the material that is used to make it. Now, I have taken two sets of examples in order to convey it. One is a study that has been done in regions of eastern part of India. Now, if you look at it very carefully, then you see that there is this sort of enclosed space, and then there are other spaces which are sort of semi open space of these kinds. So, that is what has been shown here in an axonometry. So, at this level also there is a type, but at also the manner in which it has been grouped together. So, if I sketch it for you, it is very simple. So, in some way it is trying to sort of group it, so that there are certain excesses which are there, but it somehow complete the sense of this. Okay. So, one at a level of unit and second at a level of organization. Let us see next example. Again, if you observe very carefully here, so there is a certain way in which this land parcel has been done, and there are certain way in which this grouping is sort of done, as compared to the earlier one where the size of the plot was bigger. In this case, narrower one has compelled the type to organize itself in a series of sort of linear space connected by a sort of a linear network. So, for example, in this case the grouping is staggered. In this case again it is somewhat staggered, but it is opening towards this side, it is opening here, and in this case the enclosure is such that either it is opening here and this part has been worked out in some way that carries some function. So, if you see, there are series of these additive space which are sort of working together at a level of organization. Now, at a level of unit, you see this enclosed and this semi open, you see this enclosed, this semi open, you see this enclosed, this semi open. So, there are certain sense in which the idea has continued. Now, the only thing what is happening, in some way there is further subdivision that is made. So, let me again go to the next example. Then the way it is grouped are like this. So, there is again a sense of certain way in which the enclosure opens up, but then if you look at sort of the level of the building, it has one enclosed space and semi open space, semi open space, enclosed space, enclosed space, semi open space. So, this idea has continued. Of course, at a level of organization there are some differences, and the difference again I want to recall is coming from one of the fact is the land of parcel that is available, or the width of the land which is available and which is facing certain directions and orientation. Now, here I have tried to show you in a very simple way, sort of in a way in which some of the parts are sort of opened up, so that you can see what is happening inside, the materials that are used in order to make a type. You can see some sense of the manner in which the spaces are used, etc. So, the question you might ask is, how do you decipher a type? Because I have been talking about all of these, unless until we do not have some rules to decipher a type, it makes no sense. So, I have put down 4 or 5 important rules that make up a type. So, first is put various spatial type together. So, if you are trying to study a settlement, you document it, put all these say plan type together. Now, once you put it together, identify common elements. So, for example, your element could be a courtyard, it could be some kind of a semi open space. So, identify one of the elements and see how it is continuing in the other, or whether it is continuing, in what manner it is continuing, how is it transforming, etc., etc. The third is identify systems of combination of common elements of the type. So, what are the rules of combination is again. So, whether it is additive, whether it is subtractive, etc. Then the fourth is identify continuity of the systemic relationship. So, if for example, a courtyard is in relation to say 2 kinds of room, then is this relationship continuous in all of these? Then this is the first hint or indication of an idea which is continuing, and therefore, understanding of the type, or how do you decipher a type. Then you can put it together. You can also say there are certain similarity and there are certain variants of the type itself, but it almost follows the similar rule. So, what I have done is, as I explained you, I have put all the 3 together. So, at a level of the type, we discussed that there are certain sets of spaces which are, say for example, these spaces which are almost similar in many of these cases some way. So, it is giving us the first hint of existence of some relationship which we can understand. Then there are set of semi open space in each of these, in some way or the other there is some hint about that. So, we can come to a conclusion that the type that you saw there when we did a comparison, it is basically made out of the unit which I am showing you to the right. So, if you look at it, it is made out of one sort of enclosed space and the other set of semi open space, and this idea almost continues. At a level of section, sometimes what happens, either the semi open space and the closed space, both of them are covered with a roof, or sometimes the semi open space might be covered with lean one sided sloped roof. So, then at a level of sections there is some variations, but at a level at which there are formal relationship of the parts, there are certain continuity. So, now recall the first said put various spatial type together. So, we understand that this unit type to the right repeats, identify common elements. So, there is enclosed space and semi open space, identify systems of combination of common elements. So, the manner in which it is combining, there is an additive way of combining. So, they are related in some way with one entrance sort of, and identify continuity of the systemic relationship. So, the above relationship is visible both in plan and section. However, at a level of sections you can find this kind of a variations. Now, here we also discussed in the earlier part, there are at a level of organization there are certain degree, but there is certain attempt to group it, and that is what we might consider as that when a sort of grouping is made out of units, the thing that we need to understand, it is not continuous. So, it does not make a continuous building block, rather it breaks up into parts, and that is how it makes a grouping. So, in some way that idea or that rule continues, and if you recall it, then I discussed that type is a set of relationship and plan organization are merely ways to represent it. So, please understand this again and again and again. And so, what we come across is that there are clustered relationship and there are linear relationships. Now, let me take another example, city of Mundra. I have taken one urban block. If you observe very carefully, we have also tried to make a series of detailed drawings. So, if you can understand, you can also understand the various parts of it, the geometry of the space itself, or the manner in which it is coming together, the manner in which the streets are organized, etc. Again, coming back to the earlier rule which I talked about, is to put all of these together. So, the rightmost drawing that you see, if you observe again very carefully, so you see this element here, to some extent this element here. You see a continuity of a courtyard here, and some way a sense of a courtyard here. If you observe type B, then you might realize the manner in which it is combined. With respect to the courtyard, there is one set of spaces which are some way additive, but also in some way it staggers and becomes part of the courtyard itself. Then there are other sets of spaces which combines. So, there are in one side there are one layer, in the other one there are two layers of spaces which are combined linearly in order to make this unit. Now, the same relationship also holds here. So, if you observe very carefully, then with respect to courtyard you have this space, then there are two layered space which are here. Now, what happens if you observe here is there is some way in which it is diluted, in the sense that the courtyard now extends almost, and it sort of becomes the back becomes almost like a space where you directly enter into the courtyard, whereas these relationships are held on. So, that also gives that there are certain continuity in the manner in which the courtyard organizes it, but there are also certain way the differences are created, and therefore, I have put type A and type B. So, in this part of the presentation, we discussed about some of the important concepts like urban structure, urban tissue, urban block. We also tried to discuss about the importance of figure ground, the relevance of it, the manner in which we can read it, and what are the kinds of learnings that we can take out of it. We also discussed about type and typology, where we discussed what are the ways to decipher it, what is its relevance, etc. So, I hope this presentation will help you in some way to understand the basic grammar or the syntax or the terms that are used in order to understand city as an artifact. Thank you.